For the next 1 hour, Rudy and I are going to take you through a little journey which puts mind, brain, body, experience in the framework of consciousness. Okay, so how do we explain mind, brain, body, and experience? By shifting our allegiance from the physical to the non-physical, if I may say that. And we'll start with where we started with when we met. That historical meeting.
Now you know I have a shy kidney.
So the brain is a verb. Let's talk about that. Does every experience change the brain?
Well, yes. Every experience and bringing in new sensory information, and as we talked about this morning, turning into signals turning into contextual information, is changing synapses. And neuroplasticity is the ability to form new synapses or to strengthen existing synapses, depending on how the new information triggers what you already knew. So all learning is based on association. So all information coming in, you're learning all the time as you're taking in new information, and so you're changing that part of the neural network, which is changeable. I mean, some parts of the brain, of course, are hardwired for breathing and autonomic nervous system, but that which can be changed is changing all the time.
So would it be accurate to say that our brain is created by our genes, but sculpted by experience?
And I think you could say the same thing for genes, that you can't, well, I mean, now there are genomic editing techniques like CRISPR-Cas for changing genes, which gets a little dicey. And, I think a true geneticist is like a sailor respects the ocean, and a true sailor, and whenever they think they know the ocean, their ship sinks. And I think it's the same thing with the genome. A true geneticist respects the genome enough to not think we know enough to change it. But that's a whole other question. But the fact is, you inherit the DNA you inherit, and that's a clay with a certain set of characteristics, color, texture, but you get to sculpt it. And that clay, your genes are clay, your DNA is clay, you sculpt it with epigenetics, where you chemically modify genes as expression programs as a result of your habits, good programs, bad habits, detrimental programs that lead to inflammation. And you sculpt your neuroplasticity. I mean, how you're viewing your world, your perspective, your attitude, your impressions, your expectations are all influencing your neuroplasticity, and emotion is a huge part of sculpting neuroplasticity, because emotions are what can reinforce memories. Like everyone remembers where they were on 9/11, because emotional experience leads to a stronger memory and more consolidation. So, these are all tied in, but you're sculpting it every day. You're making your world and sculpting it every day, and it's sculpting you.
And so you're sculpting the brain, you're activating certain genes, you're deactivating certain genes, depending on the experience you're having, both perceptual experience, but also the mental experience that interprets the perceptual experience.
Right, because the experience is one thing, but then how you are emotionally reacting to that experience is also sculpting your brain. And every memory you recall because of an experience you're having right now, like seeing the pink roses, is also being colored by your emotions. So emotions are what are dictating how you recall a memory. And the important thing to remember is that we never recall a memory perfectly. We're not DVDs, we're not recorders, and we recall memories in a completely, plastic way, manipulated by our emotions, and not just at the time of the event we're recalling, but the emotions at the time that we're reminded to recall that event. So memory is highly imperfect.
Many years ago, I read, and I hope that is still true, or it's not true, you can clarify, that in a baby there are many more connections between neurons than in an adult, and that experience basically sculpts the brain in a way that it edits out what it hasn't experienced or what it hasn't interpreted. And I'll give you an example. So many years ago, actually in medical school, I read about this experiment where scientists took kittens, brought them up in a room that had only horizontal stripes. They took other kittens and they brought them up in a room that had vertical stripes. And then when these kittens grew up, one group of kittens could only see a horizontal world, so they would bump into things like furniture legs. The other group of kittens could only see a vertical world. They could see the furniture leg, but not the horizontal aspect of an object. In other words, perception is a learned phenomenon, and how we interpret perception is also a learned phenomenon, and the brain is the record of that.
Yeah, perception is trained. You know, you make a really important point about infants, that they have exponentially 10 to 100 times more synapses than us. I mean, in essence, a baby's born with full potential. I mean, just, you know, no context, no ability to interpret, a few genetic memories for instinct to survive. But from day one, based on the things they're seeing with their parents and how their parents are taking care of them, those synapses start getting pruned. The same video I showed of the microglial cell eating the synapse, pruning synapses, which is a bad thing during neuroinflammation and Alzheimer's, is exactly what you do need in an infant. Those microglial cells are deliberately pruning synapses, clearing away axons. There's apoptosis or programmed cell death. And so from day one, that baby's brain is being sculpted so that the baby will agree with the world we already have created. Otherwise, that would not have happened. They're a clean slate and fully pluripotent to become anything.
If the baby is abandoned, as has happened to some babies in the jungle, brought up by wolves, then it has a wolf kind of a pattern of behavior, right?
Yeah, it's our world is a learned behavior.
Mm-hmm. And the brain then is the objective correlate of the conditioned mind. Would you agree that the conditioning of and the constructs and the interpretations and of course emotions, whether you're loved or not loved or abused, all this is constantly shifting neural networks, not only in a baby, but even in adults. So the adult brain is plastic, the adult brain is plastic, gene expression is plastic. Therefore, the body itself, which is it's a kind of a dynamic printout of genes, epigenetic behavior, and neural networks, and of course gene activity in the brain, that's constantly printing this thing out that we call the body.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we agree both our brain and our genome are verbs. They're not nouns. They're constantly in action. When you think about this pruning and conditioning, we're being trained from day one to interpret the world a certain way, to have certain reactions. That's why that, you know, the limbic system, the midbrain, which is much older than the frontal cortex, I like to say that's where we live, because every day we're reacting to sensory signals coming in to put them into context. This means that, this means that. And then we're also triggering emotions. But the thing people forget is that imagination is the recapitulation of memories imperfectly and strategically and creatively. I mean, when you're creating, when we write books, or if we're creating a piece of art, you know, the beautiful art here we're seeing, you know, this is coming out of regurgitated memories that are imperfect, that are now being deliberately imperfectly reproduced. You can't. So we can argue about it, we can debate about this, but you can't really recapitulate something you didn't learn, unless we want to go down the rabbit hole a little bit and talk about non-local consciousness and recapitulating things we never learned.
which we'll go into in a
Yes.
little moment.
And as you know, I'm open to that. But I'm speaking like a neuroscientist first, but
Yeah.
I'm very willing to go down the rabbit hole.
Okay. So we'll go there in a bit. So before we proceed with this conversation, Renee, can you put on that video of the baby, that was sent to me by my daughter, who received this video from a friend of ours who just delivered a baby, and the baby's less than or about 1 year. So let's see this video. You can see it here too.
Sean, what's it doing? Whoa. Whoa. Get it. Get it.
Okay, so
Looks
here...
like fun.
Huh?
So it looks like fun.
Looks like fun. So what is the baby experiencing? Colors, sounds, sensory activity, perceptual activity.
And no connotations or interpretations.
No connotations. It doesn't know that that thing is called a toy. And it doesn't know at this stage that this thing is called a shoe, or that is called a hand, or this is called a body. All it's experiencing is colors, shapes, forms, sounds, textures, sensations, and probably when it closes eyes, images.
And movement.
kinesthetic change experiences. And then now the conditioning starts. We tell this baby, your father is English, your mother is Indian, your name is whatever, and you're a male, you're now a US citizen, and then this child starts to build up on that conditioning till it has a sculpted brain and a conditioned mind. Now, you said something very important, which is about imagination, is basically a memory that is not fully accurate, but it projects itself as an image and a desire and so on.
Like a dream.
Like a dream. Like a dream. And with that, in the Eastern wisdom traditions, they call that karma. Karma is this kid has proclivities or tendencies because of its genetic memory. It has proclivities, tendencies, which in the consciousness traditions are called sanskaras, or seeds of memory, potential memory, or proclivities. And those memories then lead to desires, and those desires lead to new karma. So karma, memory, desire is the recycling of the conditioned mind, and then once in a while there's a disruption, breakthrough, and a step forward, like a spiral. So the soul's journey through cosmic time is the recycling of karma, memory, desire, and then at a certain point, a learning experience, been there, done that, over, you either transcend the memory or you reframe the memory, reframe the intention. In other words, you free yourself from the karma, and now you are, in a way, accessing a deeper level of consciousness, which we call pure consciousness, beyond the conditioned mind.
And you can say that emotion is reframing the memory. So, imagination, when we talk about SIFT, right, with the brain...
SIFT, S-I-F-T, sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. Okay, so all experience is either a sensation or an image or a feeling, a thought, then the rest is a construct. This is a body, this is a mind, this is a microphone, this is a shoe, that's the world, there are people, and I'm here, you're there, that's all constructs, just like latitude, longitude, money, Wall Street, Greenwich Mean Time. These are all human constructs based on raw experience with this kid is having.
Right. And when Dan Siegel first, we talked to him about SIFT,
Hmm?
I said, well, images, isn't that a sensation? That's a part of vision. And what he meant by image was something that's from imagination.
Mm-hmm.
So your memories are causing new thoughts and feelings all the time as you're getting new input and you're associating it with what you already know. But images are really interesting because imagination itself is the fuel for imagination is memory and experience.
Or karma.
So, or
Karma.
Yeah. I mean, when you're dreaming, you're recapitulating memories in creative ways and seeing people and places you've never seen before. Then the question is, when you see, like when you're lucid dreaming, right? And we both like lucid dreaming, and we met once in a lucid dream, which was interesting. That was a weird Sunday morning, Deepak. Again, another story. But in lucid dreams, you're waking up in a dreamscape, and you're in a certain town, and you're meeting certain people, and you get exquisite detail in these villages. You say, where the heck is this coming from? And part of you wants to say, another life, it's coming from some other consciousness. The neuroscientist says, I'm regurgitating my memories in some really cool way and creating a landscape in my dream that I might also paint if I was a painter. So this is one of the big things that you deal with as an academic, is that if a neuroscientist like myself at Harvard was to say a dreamscape is coming from a past life or bringing back karma versus just a regurgitated memory, luckily I have tenure in an endowed chair already, right? So, but to me, these things are worth thinking about. They're worth debating because anybody who's had a supernatural or some type of psychic experience of any kind, and I've had them, has to then say, and the realization has to be personal, there's something more, right?
So this leads us to the hard problem of consciousness, which you and I have talked about now for 8 years. How many people know what the hard problem of consciousness is?
The hard problem.
The hard problem of consciousness.
I'm from
Wow.
Boston, so we say hard.
Okay.
It's the hard problem.
Okay, so this is the hard problem of consciousness, and let me explain it to you in a very simple way. But the hard problem of consciousness basically is that where we are in our understanding of neuroscience today, we cannot explain any experience, whether it's a perceptual experience or it's a mental experience, and this has to do with memory. I'll get there in a moment, or karma and all these things. So everybody is looking at this flower right now. And our current science says that there are photons that are coming from here. Light is bouncing off this object. The object exists. The object exists for you out here. There are photons coming to your eyes from here, and they're colorless. They have no color. So the photons that are coming from here to your eyes are not this color. They have no color. They are dimensionless in the traditional sense. They do not have units of mass and energy. If they have mass, it's so minuscule, almost to be...
Yeah, they have frequency.
Their frequency.
Right.
The frequency of electromagnetic energy. Now what happens in your eyes is a chemical reaction. What goes to your brain is an electrical current, which we call an action potential. What happens in your brain is an electrochemical event. But you see a rose, or you see me, or you see this room. So how does an electrical current going to the brain create this experience? This is called the hard problem of consciousness. We cannot explain how electrical currents going into your brain produce any experience. This is a visual experience. But you're also listening to me and you're hearing sound. And again, what's happening is air molecules are coming to your ears, an electrical current is going to your brain. In the brain, there's chemistry, and you say, oh, that's Deepak. That's the sound of his voice. Same thing with when you taste chocolate ice cream, all that's going to your brain is an electrical current. Or when you smell a pine forest or a perfume, or you have any sensation, this sensation. Okay, this is hard, this sensation. I close my eyes, all I feel is a hard sensation. This is our experience every day of the world. We experience our body like this, we experience the world like this.
And by the way, that's just sensory receptors.
Correct.
That allow your brain to interpret this as being real.
Yes.
That's all it is.
That's all it is.
Right.
But the hard problem is, we can see what's happening in the brain, but we cannot explain how these electrochemicals are actually producing this experience. Would you agree?
Totally agree.
Okay. So now, instead of looking at this rose, just close your eyes for a second and imagine this rose. Now please open your eyes. When you were imagining the rose, you had an experience, right? You saw something similar to this. And your brain produced electrochemistry in the same way when you're looking at this. But when you were imagining the rose, where was that JPEG? Okay, where was that JPEG of the imagined rose? Or right now, where is the experience of seeing this happening? Now, Rudy's colleagues would say it's happening in the brain. But then our question to those colleagues would be, how does this room fit inside your brain? Okay, how do I fit inside your brain? How does the Milky Way galaxy fit inside your brain? And to which his colleagues would say the brain has an electrochemical representation of this experience. But then how does that electrochemical representation produce this? This is the hard problem, right?
Very hard.
Okay, very hard. Very hard problem. But it brings us to an important question. I asked you to imagine a red rose, and you did. Now recall, because Rudy said memory and imagination go together, right? So try and remember the house you lived in when you were a teenager. Can you all do that right now? Some experience is happening. Try and remember what you had for dinner last night. Some experience is happening. Okay, so that experience in our consciousness language is called a qualia, quality of experience, okay? In the consciousness literature. So, Rudy, before we imagine this rose, before we imagine the house we lived in when we were teenagers, before we imagine what we had for dinner yesterday, where is that information?
I have no idea. I mean, look, we don't know.
Yeah.
That's really the essence of the hard problem. We have neurons, we have 100 billion neurons, we have some people up to a quadrillion synapses that are forming to allow you to record and recall that rose.
Mm-hmm.
And when you recall it, you don't recall it perfectly, because again, emotion has a huge influence. What's going on in your life right now that's firing up those neurons and synapses that recorded that rose are going to change how you recall that rose. Or you can think of your house you grew up in a totally different emotional state, and it's going to be a little different in terms of what you picture in that house.
But you do agree that we don't know where that
image
is.
was. When you picture your mom's face in your head, or you picture
feel the emotion,
or picture the feeling you had, during a great event in your life, like a baby being born, and you can recall a feeling of exhilaration. Where the heck is that stored? I mean, how do you store a feeling?
I recall that you were in a conference with neuroscientists and you texted me and you said...
I asked everybody. I asked everybody.
Yeah, you asked over 100 neuroscientists. Yeah, but no one had the answer, right?
No, they got a lot of exercise.
Yeah. No one had the answer. So now you understand what the heart problem is. Okay, the heart problem is you can't explain through current neuroscience how you're experiencing this rose, or the sound of my voice, or a memory, or an image, or a sensation, or a taste, or a smell. We don't even know where that experience is happening, because it's certainly not happening in the brain. Okay? What's happening in the brain are neural correlates of experience, which we call...
Trigger synaptic pathways, neural networks, in
Yeah.
a variety of different ways to recall the same thing.
Correct. So this
It's
is...
being modified every day by neuroplasticity.
And
like
these,
right now.
these experiences are called neural correlates of consciousness, or NCC, right? Okay. So this is the hard problem of consciousness, and Rudy said it's a very hard problem if you assume that the world is real. Okay? That assumption in philosophy, and today in science as well, is called realism. Realism. Okay, so please note the word realism means, and
What you see is what you get.
is what you see is what you get. Beautiful.
That's it.
Now, people like Einstein were realists. His contemporaries like Niels Bohr and Wolfgang Pauli and Schrödinger and Max Planck, they were not realists, they were what are called idealists. So the word idealist goes back to Plato, who said that the world you see is a mental construct. The world you see is a mental construct, and your body is part of that mental construct. And so we call them idealists, ideas. Okay? Everybody so far so good? Okay? Now today when you talk to realists, either in philosophy or in science, there are three kinds of realists. The first kind of realist is called a naive realist. Okay, naive realist.
I know a lot of those.
You and I know a lot of them on our
Yeah.
email exchange.
Yes.
So a naive realist would say what Rudy just said. What you see is what you get. The world is exactly the way you're seeing it.
Right. Only the human universe exists for them.
And only the human
So-
universe
and-
exists.
And
for
I
them.
say, think about a bacterium in a dish gets signals to either be attracted or repulsed, to eat, or to divide. This is a whole world based on those little signals, attractants and repulsions. There's a whole world based on that, and we're the next step up. And there's many, many more steps after that.
But in between there
Right.
are
So why do we think this is all
dolphins
there is?
and
You say to a naive
alligators
realist.
and insects with
Yeah.
multiple eyes. So,
We're still on a journey to who knows where.
okay, yeah. So this makes it obvious, I hope to you, that naive realism doesn't hold any water.
No.
Right? There's nothing to substantiate or say that naive realism is true. It's a learned phenomenon, and in our case, it's a culturally learned phenomenon.
It's perception limited.
Perception limited. Everybody agree so far? Let's throw naive realism out the window. The second kind of realism is called representational realism. The world is real, but it is represented in the brain in the form of these codes, just like a computer code, okay, neurochemical codes. But how do these codes actually create this experience? That's again the hard problem.
We can come up with ways in which these codes, whether genetic or neural, allow you to pass on information, allow you to recall information, pass on genetic information, recall experiences. But it doesn't explain where those experiences are.
So those
or
who
where they're stored.
defend those experiences as representational realism, they say, they have a good argument. They say when you stimulate the brain, you stimulate this part of the brain, you'll get this emotion. You stimulate this part of the brain, you'll see this image. Therefore, the brain is like Aladdin's lamp. You scratch this portion and it creates this world. Okay, you scratch this other person conjures another world. But then you say, how? That's part of the hard problem. We don't know.
But there was an experiment recently, to think about, where they took nematodes, little dirt worms, and they can train a nematode in a very primitive way. They literally, nematode researchers have no eyelashes because they pluck an eyelash out from their eye, and then they glue the eyelash to a little paintbrush handle, and you stimulate the nematode with an eyelash. So you always know nematode researchers because they have no eyelashes, right? And then you can train the nematode in certain ways to, if they go in this part of the dish or there's this chemical there, and then they get the eyelash on them, they don't like it, they hate eyelashes. And so what they did was they actually transferred a neural network from a trained nematode to an untrained nematode and got that nematode to respond the same way. So that's kind of, we got to think about what that means, because that means that the neurons that recorded that experience were transferable, right? And that threw me for a loop.
Yeah, but until you see that any code can reproduce the experience. I could, like right now, we could record this on a DVD.
So you're saying it's just like a JPEG.
It's like a JPEG.
It had the rights ones and zeros.
Yeah, it's zeros and ones. So you can reproduce. It doesn't mean that it's actually the producer of the experience.
But it goes beyond to say not only where is the experience, but how can another, if that's replicated, if that experiment's real, how does another, organism able to recall the same experience it never had?
If I send you my picture on the iPhone, and you click on it, you see the picture, right?
Yep.
So we're doing the same thing with the brain, we're doing the same thing with the link, we're doing the same thing with the DVD or any other device that records codes of experience.
But that means it's a shared experience.
It's a shared experience.
Right.
And a shared construct.
A shared construct for a shared experience. The experience some organism had now could be given to another organism.
Correct.
Which means it's in a greater...
That means consciousness has leaky margins.
Leaky consciousness.
Leaky consciousness.
You heard it here first, folks.
You have your consciousness.
We have an example.
How many people have a dog or a cat at home? Okay? So you have a relationship with that sentient being, right? That's because your consciousness and that consciousness, leaky margins, you're sharing certain experiences. But now let's go to the third form of realism. So this is called representational realism. Doesn't solve the hard problem. Okay? Third form of realism is called scientific realism. And so scientific realism says, the world is actually made up of atoms and particles and force fields and electromagnetism and gravity. And somehow the brain converts those signals, because they're signals, as you said, right? Into this experience.
Into information.
Into information. And that integrated information then gives you this experience.
Right.
Problem over there is, if the world is made up of particles and force fields, why does it look like this? Because in the brain there's no color, there's no sound, there's nothing that we could call an experience. So scientific realism, very useful to create machines, to create email, so you can text a message or send a movie to somebody. Great, it works.
And people like Hawking would tell you that information cannot be destroyed.
Cannot be destroyed. But it still doesn't solve the problem that we call hard problem.
But it does, but in terms of this information, I think think of it as shared information.
Shared information, and then the interpretation.
Personal.
Interpretation.
You're navigating. Think of it as navigating your mind to tap into a greater mind, using your brain as the ship, you as the captain. Hopefully, unless you're letting your brain, drag you around, which we hope you don't if you read Superbrain, right? That's right, you're not your brain. But basically, you're navigating your mind as a greater mind. We have to start thinking with these new experiments coming out that we're navigating a mind as part of a greater mind with our brain.
We're navigating the mind as part of a
greater
mind.
Right.
And that greater mind is expressing itself as species-specific conditioned minds that recycle over eons of time.
Right. So we have a species-specific perception, a species-specific nervous system with which we can navigate the mind we have access to, but with a growing realization that is part of a greater mind.
This then opens the window first to idealism and then to what we call non-dualism. Idealism means that the world that you and I experience is projected through ideas. And our ideas, our thoughts, our sensations, our imagination, our memory, our desires, these are all entangled with each other as modifications of consciousness. So idealism says the world is a mental construct. So far everybody's... Now let's make it a little practical. Okay, look at this rose, and now look at that painting over there, right? So you can change your mode of experience, visual experience, anytime you want through intention. Instead of this, you become aware of that. Okay. Now, feel your the sensation in your feet as it's touching the floor or your shoes. Or feel the sensations of your body. Or think of your house. Or think of someone you love. Or think of a rainbow. Think of chocolate ice cream. Think of how the locker room in your gym smells. Think of an Italian kitchen and the smell that comes from it.
Thank you for replacing that smell.
So, did you notice all you had to do is an intention, right? And then you evoked a memory. But before you had the intention, idealism would say there was no memory. That when you evoked that memory or that image or that sensation or that experience, all there was is the seed of that memory. All there was the potential for that memory.
Like a wave potential.
Like a wave potential. And that memory, therefore, was never in a material substrate anyway. As soon as you had the memory, the desire to recall the memory, you actually constructed a memory, and at that moment, your neural networks went into action.
So this is like a quantum view of consciousness and cognition, that you have a wave potential, and then given all the events that come together at that moment, that you're recalling a house or looking at the painting, in physics, that wave becomes a particle. In this case, the material part is the memory itself, but the potential for how that memory would appear and be experienced was just a potential until you caused it to collapse.
So this is what David Bohm, who was a great physicist in the last century, friend of Einstein, an idealist in a way, because he talked about hidden variables and so on. Just as part of the historical note, he didn't cooperate with the atomic bomb. The US government thought he was a spy. No news, the same news we are recycling now these days. And actually he couldn't get a job. He was being investigated by the CIA. Einstein got him a job in Brazil during the war because he wouldn't cooperate with the atomic bomb, and then he went to England, became a professor there. But David Bohm said exactly what you're saying, that our thoughts have this wave-like character, which is outside of space-time, because a wave doesn't exist in space-time, it doesn't have units of mass and energy, but when you recall the memory, when you have a thought, then there's an event in the brain.
So there's a potentiality that is allowed to collapse using your neural correlates. And it can collapse differently depending on which parts of your neural network are being turned on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Which is why memories are imperfect and why imagination is endless.
And where I'm going with this, though,
I'm not sure where you're going, but I'm having fun.
where I'm going with this is memory is not in your brain. It's in your soul. Okay? Karma is not in your brain. It's in your soul. Imagination is not in your brain. It's in your soul. And what's your soul? It is the proclivities or tendencies that you have for an experience. And that mind, brain, body, and this world are the recycling of your soul as this experience until you get out of the prison of karma. This is the non-dual aspect. So now what we go is beyond idealism, beyond Plato, to what is called non-dualism. Okay, so this is the end of the journey. Non-dualism means everything is one. There's only one awareness. It's not personal. The awareness that you have right now, in which you're experiencing, in your experience right now, in awareness, you're experiencing that which you call my body, you're experiencing that which you call my mind, and you're experiencing this, which is my world, your unique way of experiencing the world. This is your soul or your core being or your consciousness that is right now vibrating as mind, body, universe, and the sift we spoke about, sensations, images, feelings, thoughts, which is all experience. Sensation means all perceptions too. Color is a sensation. So all these experiences are happening right now, not in your brain, but in your consciousness, in your core being, and your soul is like a part of the ocean of consciousness. So your soul is little drop in this vast ocean of consciousness, but as Rumi says in one of his poems, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're also the ocean in the drop. The ocean, which is universal consciousness, is expressing through your consciousness, which we call the soul in this case, and it is projecting a world of mind, body and universe that is uniquely yours because you're filtering it through the filter of the conditioned mind.
But I can
karma,
borrow.
The memories, the imagination.
But I can borrow.
Huh?
My soul can borrow your experiences. If the nematode experiment holds up, I could take some neural networks from you and borrow your experience from your soul to my soul.
This is
they're not personally owned.
This is now where we get into non-locality, right? So
right.
Non-local, what people call extrasensory perception, remote viewing, remote healing, remote sensing, precognition, precognitive dreams, memory of other lifetimes, is what is happening is you're going into the non-local domain of consciousness. You're going past your jiva. Your jiva is your conditioned mind, into your Atman, which is your soul, with certain proclivities, but that is part of the universal soul that, in religious traditions you say God, or the divine intelligence, and say where is it? Again, wrong question, because it's not in space-time. Just like your soul is not in space-time. This experience is in space-time, but even this experience is happening in consciousness. Right? Would you buy that?
I would buy that.
Okay.
Yes.
So then we have solved the hard problem. Okay? The hard problem is only hard if you assume that the world is physical.
Or you assume it's only your own.
Or
you assume it's only your own.
It's only your own, yes.
Your brain is tricking you. Your brain is using neural networks to condition you to project your world in a similar but unique way to others. But the fact is, these are neural correlates of experience that maybe we'll find out for sure in 10, 20, 15 years that are shared experiences, a shared consciousness, that our brain's just one ship, and we can trade ships. It's one ocean,
So
navigating the
let's
mind.
now take this one step further. Reincarnation.
Told you we're going down a rabbit hole. It always happens. We're going down a little deeper than usual this time.
Yeah, but we discussed enough about Alzheimer's. So no, we know everything about through you.
Well, there's a reason why your name is Deepak.
So now going to reincarnation. So, you say, I have memories of another lifetime. What is the I that is saying that? I have memories of another lifetime. What is the I that is saying that? Obviously, it's not a body-mind. The body-mind is part of the projection. So is the world. What is the I is the matrix of collective memories, and then beyond the matrix of collective memories, it's the womb of God's memories, or the divine, if you want to call it the divine feminine, because we're using the word feminine metaphors here. So the womb of the divine, the womb where it's all creation happens, is innumerable minds, innumerable perceptions, innumerable species-specific perceptions, innumerable conditioned perceptions based on culture, based on history, based on economics, based on the mythical stories we've heard, based on the religious stories we've heard, based on the philosophies we've been brought up, and today scientific conditioning, which basically is another story.
It's all about agreement.
It's all about agreement. So we are creating this world right now. And we have created all other worlds that have existed and all other worlds that will exist in the future. Isn't this the evolution of consciousness?
Give me a minute. No, I mean, yes, it is the evolution of consciousness. I think that we're all. I think that the turning point is going to be that we create our own world through our neural networks every day, and it's changing every day with neuroplasticity, and our experience is changing our gene programming every day, and that's changing our entire patterns of health. We even know that changes in genes can be passed on to the next generation. Things that you acquired traits in this life can be passed on to the next generation through epigenetics. All of this is just a vehicle for sculpting consciousness. All of it. We're on a consciousness journey using what we have available to us in terms of DNA
and that consciousness,
and fat, water, and cells.
And that consciousness has infinite malleability. It can adapt itself to whatever experience it wants to have.
So if it's physical, it may not be infinite, but if it's not physical, it becomes infinite. And then this gets back to the regurgitation of memories as imagination. That certainly could be considered infinite. But infinite's a big word. I mean, and the thing is that.
But if you count all the experiences,
I think the two words that scientists don't use easily is random and infinite.
But the physicists and mathematicians do. It's the basis of all quantum physics today.
Right.
Is math, which includes infinity,
right,
and randomness or unpredictability, right?
Right, but in biology and in perception and cognition, random and infinite are really difficult things to fathom.
Correct.
Because even if you say memories can be regurgitated as imagination in infinite ways, well, there's only so much.
Yeah, but
fuel.
If you include all the species of consciousness, other sentient beings, other biological organisms, you can see reality is as the vessel through which consciousness is expressing itself.
Yes, if infinite is all possible.
All possible.
Within this, we don't know what's possible. I mean, again, I always think back to this bacterium that thinks this is the universe, right? A few signals for repulsion, a few signals for attraction, to divide and to eat.
Okay.
And we've evolved to where we are. But, you know, we're bacteria compared to some other species, and we think we know the world. That's why the naive realism was thrown out. But, you know, who knows how far we can go, and how do you take that journey to go farther? What type of perception do we have to open ourselves up to beyond the five senses we have now?
What we have to open
And even
up.
in vision, there's most of the wavelengths we don't see.
Yeah.
In sound, you know, mice speak in ultrasonic language. We can record mice and slow it down, right? When a male mouse is near a female mouse, they sing beautifully, you know, and you can record it. I mean, and it's actually, they're consistent. People are doing autism research where they actually, if a mouse, for example, breathes air pollution or is stressed out, maternal, you know, by the mother and not groomed correctly, later on, they don't know how to sing right to mate, right? And they actually will have choppy little songs without continuity, and you can actually judge whether they're on a normal course socially or not. But you know, but we would never know that because they sing at a frequency we don't hear, right? So there's all, you know, this is just to say that there's so much more where we can go.
But further reinforcement that consciousness is species-specific and projecting itself as species-specific and culture-specific experiences. Now,
But
where I want to go with this...
But wait, I want to ask you, where can we go? Where do you picture us? We're bacteria, okay, in a petri dish. We're pretty good
humans.
bacteria. No, but I was just saying, as humans, let's just say, relative to some other species, where we are right now with our five senses and our 100 billion neurons, where's your imagination say we can go?
I think the next frontier is non-local experiences, which are normally called psychic experiences, or dormant potentials, which Patanjali speaks about in his Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Is when you have a combination of Dhyan, Dharana, Samadhi, then you have access to non-local realities, but you also have access to the consciousness of other species. So you can communicate with plants, you can communicate with animals. That's what these shamans do.
How about communication with devas, angels? Are they beings? Are they highly evolved beings of consciousness?
They are symbolic representations of infinite consciousness.
Or are they highly evolved beings?
They are highly evolved beings.
Are they we the bacteria compared to
We could
them?
be. Humans could be part of the ecosystem of the meta-humans, where we are going. Now, I want to end this by something that actually puts it all together. And that is...
Glad you're doing that.
If you
Only Deepak could do
recognize,
that.
if you recognize that your true self is infinite consciousness. Okay, Renee has actually pulled out a slide about what I was saying. So I was going to say this, and now we have the slide. Let's conclude with these principles. Let's see, Rudy, if you agree. Because this would solve the hard problem. This would say consciousness is all there is. And so at the source of all creation, there is only consciousness.
Agree.
Okay. Number two.
And you know, along with that brings into question the material. That brings into question the material world.
What we call the material world is an interpretation of SIFT, S-I-F-T. Consciousness, the immeasurable potential of all experience in all knowers, all knowing, and all phenomena known in all living beings.
Immeasurable so far.
Immeasurable so far.
Right. I have to say that as a scientist. We might be able to measure something.
Yeah. Mind, body, brain, and universe are interpretations of experiences in consciousness. How do you know you have a mind? Because you can witness it, right? How do you know you have a brain? In order to know a brain, you have to experience a brain.
Yeah.
How do you know there's a universe, you have to first experience it. So there are interpretations of experiences in consciousness. Number 4, the interpretations themselves are also experiences in consciousness. Those little kittens, this is only a horizontal world because all I see is a horizontal world.
And those interpretations, especially the question of why rather than just what, how, where, and when, which is what we do in science, is what drives the evolution of consciousness.
Beautiful. I'm going to end with this and then put you on the spot about one thing. Everyday reality is a lucid dream in a timeless, vivid now. So no realism. The world that we call real is the projection of your consciousness. Because this world that you're calling real, by tonight it'll be a dream. Or even in 5 minutes it'll be a dream.
I'll go with that.
Okay? 6. Waking up means becoming aware of consciousness projecting this lucid dream. And by the way, your mind and body are part of the dream. Waking up to...
You could have emailed these to me before.
Next. By waking up, you become a co-creator of everyday reality.
But wait a minute. If we go back, let's go back to number 5 again. Go back to number, yeah. Everyday reality is a lucid dream. Okay, forward. I'm just doing a little logic stream. 6. So when you say waking up, what do you mean by waking up?
Self-awareness, awareness of awareness.
Okay. Agreed.
Okay? Next. By waking up, you become a co-creator of reality.
Yes.
Next. That's it. Now, last question to put you on the spot. And don't answer it because if you don't want to, because this is ultimately going to be public, and I don't want.
I have tenure.
You have tenure. So the prevailing dogma in science today, is what we call Darwinian evolution. And Darwinian evolution is based on 2 principles: random mutations and natural selection. So a mutation is a genetic variation. So, Rudy can explain this better, but if a letter is upside down, or a letter is in the wrong sequence, or a letter is missing, that's a genetic mutation, right? A variation.
Yeah.
So genetic mutations occur across eons of time, and according to Darwin, they're random, correct? And then there's natural selection, the mutations that dominate naturally select themselves to reproduce themselves. Now, you and I know that Darwin, the greatest scientist of all time, in at least biology, in his time, there was no knowledge of genetics, DNA, epigenetics, microbiome, and how experience shapes these activities. So, for about 20 years now, I've been suggesting that evolution is consciousness-driven.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that as a scientist?
Well, evolutionary biologists who are hardcore Darwinians will say all mutations are random. An actual wet lab scientist who works at a bench with DNA and what we call wet lab, we would never say anything's random. So there's a big difference between the evolutionary biologist who's pontificating on an armchair versus one who's doing work at the bench. At the bench, any change in DNA, even if it's in one of the so-called junk regions or intergenic DNA, to say that's random is just irresponsible, because everything has a cause. So then you have to say, okay, maybe we won't find the pattern behind the cause, but it had a cause. And I'm struck by the newer realization that, there's a study where male mice were trained to be afraid of the smell of cherry. They use an ester, a chemical ester that smells like cherries. And when the mouse smelt the cherry, they would give the mouse a little shock on its foot pad. So eventually, when the mouse smelt cherry, it would just kind of, stay in the corner of the cage and be afraid to go out on the main platform because it knew it was going to get a foot shock. Now, the male mouse then reproduced with the female, and the baby mice were born. And sure enough, a good portion of the new mice, the new male mice, the new progeny, never trained to be afraid of the smell of cherry. As soon as they smelt that same ester, they were afraid, and they cowered in the corner. Now, what happened was that the gene that encoded the olfactory receptor for that ester had been chemically modified in the male mouse by what's called methylation. They're called methylation marks. And apparently the same thing happened in the sperm. And so the babies of the male mice inherited that same chemical modification and were born being afraid of the smell of cherries. Think about the implications of that for us. Think about living your life. Think about what we're going through and how we're epigenetically modifying our DNA and passing that on in one generation. First of all, it's not random. Now, we didn't get to mutations yet. This is a modification of DNA, not a mutation, right? But that's a trait that's being passed on with one generation. Darwin would be like, what? That would be just totally non-Darwinian. Then the question is mutations. Well, the fact is, when you epigenetically modify DNA, you think about 3 billion, billions of beads on a string, and you're folding it up in your hands, and the beads are red, yellow, green, or blue. And depending on how you fold it, this red bead might be inside, or that red bead might be outside, right? That's what the epigenetic modifications also do. In doing that, the red bead that's exposed now because of the epigenetic modification can be modified and mutated. The one that's inside is protected. So the actual physical structure of how you fold the DNA influences which bases of DNA can be mutated. And if our consciousness, our behavior, our habits affect the folding through epigenetics, we affect the mutations.
Thank you, Rudy. So, as you know, for two...
And Darwin couldn't have known that, so but there are people today who are very strong followers of Darwin who should know this, who still argue otherwise.
So, since the year 2002, I've had this very contentious relationship with what are called militant atheists. The most prominent of them is Richard Dawkins, and he's a professor at Oxford, very highly respected, but very impressive. He has a British accent. He and I
Great
have...
facial features. Great facial features to go along with.
So we have
very
had this
convincing.
contentious argument for years, and when we wrote Super Genes, he tweeted, and by the way, he's blocked me on Twitter now.
I didn't check.
He tweeted what epigenetics.
I can't wait for epigenetics, after our book came out, I can't wait for epigenetics to have its 15 minutes of fame. So now that epigenetics is fully established, there are companies, it's like, there's no doubt about it. I recently retweeted that and said to him, I hope you can adapt.
Okay. So, Rudy, I think we solved the hard problem.
Yeah.
There's no
hopefully
physical
Richard
world.
Dawkins doesn't watch this.
I'm going to send it to him.
No.
Rudy Tanzi, thank you.
Fine.